Okay, I'll call the meeting to order, and it does not look at the moment like we have any attendees, so we can certainly keep an eye on that, and if somebody pops in the near future, we can certainly take public comment from them. I will point out that we have received some written comment from Councilors Ray and Clement, Michael Dostey, Maura Murphy, and then just earlier this afternoon, Connie Hitchcock submitted something. I will note also that Dottie is putting together a summary of all those written comments. So we'll have them all in one place as we go forward going through. Any questions about public comments so far, or any comments on the public comments? Seeing none, the next item on the agenda is to look at the recommended timeline for the commission, or the committee, excuse me. The city clerk brought to everybody's attention that if we wanted to, or if it was likely, we would be recommending a charter commission, that she would need to have the council make a decision on that at its no later than its second meeting in June.
Whoops.
So that there would be time for people to put in nominating papers and to get organized for the November election. So her question was whether we wanted to shoot for that or not. I'll open it up.
I'm sorry, that was
Go ahead.
June 20, is that the June 21st meeting that we're talking about?
It would be,
Actually, it would be June
Oh, the
15th. It would
Okay.
be the second meeting in June.
Yeah, okay.
so that would be a fairly compressed timeline. And it would kind of depend on where we eventually come down on some of the bigger issues, particularly the role of mayor, the possibility of staggered terms, and any other significant changes to the organizational structure of the city and the school department. So anybody have any initial thoughts on that? I guess my kind of initial thought would be that until we have a better feeling on whether we're going to suggest any really significant changes, it's hard to say. But that I would hope that over the next couple meetings, once we get through the first run through of the charter, we can go back and spend some time on those bigger issues, maybe at the next meeting or the meeting after that, and get a little better feeling. I would prefer not to rush this. I believe, Dennis, if they don't put it on the ballot in November, they could do it at the primary next June or the following general election next November. So that's kind of my initial feeling. Let's see how things go over the next couple of meetings. And I'm pessimistic that we'll be able to recommend something that soon for them to put something out in June for a charter committee, because they'd have to actually vote at that June meeting to establish the commission and get things rolling. Any other comments on that?
I agree. That would be pretty quick.
Dennis?
Sorry, I was just jumping in to let you know we did have one attendee. If you want, when you're done with this discussion, to go back to public comment at this
Okay.
point. Sorry.
Anything else?
Well, I would just like to say that I kind of agree with what you're saying. I think that we should get through the charter first, and hopefully then we can find a little bit where we're standing. I'd hate to put pressure on the city council not knowing exactly everything that we're looking at, or putting pressure on ourselves either. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, everybody comfortable with that?
Very much so.
Okay. We did have somebody here, let's see, and he left. We only have Dale Dowdy now as the only attendee, so. if
Well,
the
we had
person-
one for a minute.
If the person comes back, we'll give them a chance to talk. I'll also, as just getting organized here, I did send out kind of a little summary discussion of what we talked about at the last meeting.
Yes, thank you.
I tried to make that representative of everybody's thoughts. I'm not sure if I got everybody's thoughts in there. I will admit, I probably threw in a couple thoughts of my own that came to me as we were going through here. But I thought that would be helpful if anybody has any comments or corrections they wanted to make in what I sent out. Now's a chance for somebody to pipe up and say, you got this wrong.
Well, I just would like to add that I appreciate everything that you wrote there, Ed. Where I wasn't able to attend the meeting, I appreciated being able to see that concisely. And I also was able to watch the meeting online, so I thought that was great also. One of the things that you had mentioned that I had mentioned to you was about a preamble. And I just would want to put that on the table. There wasn't anything that I wrote particularly, but I was very interested when I was looking myself at the model city charter that you had sent us from the National Civic League about possibly adding a preamble in there, which we don't have currently in our charter. And I was specifically encouraged by the particular language around the declaration of intent of a charter, which I found to be maybe a good way that we could like describe how the city is and what we are, and maybe almost like a mission statement type of thing. And I was encouraged that it was not anything that was enforceable by law by having a declaration of intent. It was more just characteristics of the municipality, such as like the values of the city, a lofty goal, or something to that effect. So I was hoping that we could either have a conversation around that, or at least encourage the city council to have that conversation also, as that being part of the charter.
Okay, I think that might be certainly a good idea. I will note that there were some public comments that came in that might be appropriate to address in a preamble to the charter, where they might not be appropriate to put into the specific language of the charter. So I think that's something we could certainly take a look at. So if Linda, do you want to take a shot at drafting up something?
I guess I could. I think I would want to have a little bit. I mean, I've never drafted something like this before, so I don't want to throw it way out of proportion in what my personal opinion would be. I really want it to be something that we would all work on together, because I know, so not necessarily inclined to say that I want this put in the preamble, but I was thinking like the equity statement that just passed by the city. Is that something that could be languaged around putting in a preamble, and just as in respect to like, the values of the city? I'm not sure that that's the way to go on that, but that was some of the inclination and the thinking I was having on that. So I can do a little bit more on that and try to work on some language around what is said specifically in that model city charter, because it does give a guideline there.
If you wanted to try your hand at it, maybe send it to me and I can take a look at it and maybe add some comments or reactions.
Sure.
And get something a little bit down the road that we can share with everybody for feedback.
Okay.
Does that sound like a plan? Okay. With all of the preambles done, we will get to Patty's favorite subject, which is the meat of the matter, and talk about some of the issues. So I think we got through to section 2.11 of the charter last time. And so I thought we'd pick it up there. The first comment is on section 2.11, where somebody, I think on staff, suggested that we take a look at the requirement to set out the full ordinance to be amended when any ordinance is amended. That is currently required in the charter. So I know at one point here recently, the city amended a whole big chunk of its land use code. So it produced a rather lengthy document that had nothing but language strucken out, which then was provided to the council. I will point out that unlike some other places, the full language does not have to be published in the newspaper. All that's required for publication is a summary of the language. So you don't have to print a 40-page document if you're amending a whole section of the charter in the newspaper. You just have to print a summary of it. The only place that the full document shows up is in the actual council agenda. So the council members all get it. It's all there in the public view, all of those kinds of things. Any thoughts on that?
logical.
Yeah, I think it makes sense to publish it for the full council so they can see exactly what's being eliminated. I would be concerned that something might happen and sneak by without everybody in the council being aware of it. So I would not suggest we change that part of the charter. Anybody disagree?
Good with that.
Okay. The next one is also in 2.11, section D. And this comes up in a number of places in the charter where there's a requirement that the city publish an ordinance or public hearing, date, time, stuff like that. As mentioned earlier on the ordinance, all it has to be is a summary. There are other publication requirements for public hearings on the capital plan, the budget, and bond issues. The charter was amended in 2011 to also require that it be made known through other electronic means, such as the city's website. There's some issue about whether we even want to continue or should bother continuing with putting a notice in the newspaper, because lots of people don't get the newspaper anymore. And it does cost some money to put a notice in the newspaper. I guess it is, as the newspaper circulation has gone down, the public legal notice costs have increased. Any comments on that?
Where would it be posted for the public to find out?
Basically, we'd be pretty much doing it just on the city's website or through the council agenda. Or, you could certainly have a requirement to post a notice at City Hall or the library, stuff like that. But I don't think people ever look at those notice boards.
I don't think a very high percentage of people ever go to the city council website.
That would be my concern
Something
too, Steve.
specific, like what time are the waste disposals available, or that kind of thing.
Okay. So you would suggest we leave it as is. Anybody object to that?
I would suggest maybe not say newspapers. I'd be curious to see how far back this goes, because newspapers might have been the only means of getting the news out at the time, probably even before TV. Might have been radio probably was around, and I'm sure black and white TV was around, but maybe newspapers was the social media of the time. So maybe we should just reword it so that it doesn't just exclude, just be inclusive of newspapers. Maybe it should say, some other type, media in general,
Yeah,
I'm saying general, but
I'm trying to find the section.
more people are probably on social media now than even with the newspaper. So I think newspaper kind of goes with print media. So if it is with the newspaper, it could be digital only newspaper.
Yeah,
But I don't think we should use a specific, whether it's TV, radio, or newspaper. We should just say media.
the way it's defined right now is publish means to print in one or more newspapers of general circulation in the city. And as was noted elsewhere, in a lot of the sections where we talk about publishing it, it also talks about or other appropriate electronic means, which would cover city-owned stuff. I don't know to what extent, one of the problems with the other media is unless you're doing paid media, it's up to them whether to publish it or not, or whether to make it part of their news broadcast. So you can't always depend on them unless you're willing to pay them for it. And
Question. Does anybody know this question? Does the city offer, I believe it does, where you can sign up for information and news? I know some different departments have that, but is it?
Yes.
I'm sure we could do that as well.
yes, and we do. There is you have a whole bunch of options of what to sign up for on the city's website.
Right, I thought so. That's something maybe we can promote a little bit better. I'm just.
Yeah, we have, we up to 2,000 slots now, Dennis, that we pay for people to sign up on?
We're actually over 3,000 now and actually bumping again. The pandemic, I think, has really driven people to utilizing the service even more. And so it's a great way. So yeah, we're actually a little over 3,000 now, I want to say. So reaching quite a bit.
It would kind of be interesting if we could see, I'd be curious just to see a breakdown of what they're signed up for.
Yeah.
I know a lot of them are signed up for emergency snow parking bans.
That's the big one.
Right.
That's the big one. But there are a lot of other things that they can sign up for as well.
Absolutely. No, we actually can get a full report of what folks are signed up. And I don't know if it breaks it down numbers wise, but it certainly gives us a good sense of where people
Yeah,
are.
be curious.
Yep.
And theoretically, if you sign up for a notice and it bounces back, what, 3 times, they drop you off the list. So there's a way to purge the list automatically.
Yep.
Okay, any other questions about that? As it is, I think we can take a look at whether we want to change some of the language about other sources of getting the information out. But certainly I think we ought to leave the notion of publishing in there because it does put it in a document of record that's available to everybody if they want to see it. And again, I would assume be interesting to find out, does the newspaper include those notices in their on their website and their Facebook page?
No, not that I can find. And I will tell you that I am the kind of person that looks for this stuff so I can see what meetings are happening or, and I definitely use the notifications from the city itself. And I would want to put in that, like my mother pays very close attention, but she's a newspaper person all the way. She doesn't hardly ever use her computer. I'm not sure if that's an age thing or what it is, but so we have to keep that in mind. But in regards to getting it on the newspaper online, sometimes that's even difficult because some people have to pay for a prescription. You have to pay for that subscription online. And so you can't always, you can time out on reading articles and seeing what you want to see in the paper.
You
And you-
mentioned texting, Ed. Is that where you're talking about the notifications? Because
Yeah.
texting is terrific. Yeah. I
Yeah,
didn't know if
that's
that
where
was
the,
email notifications or text alerts.
It's
it
both.
could be,
It's
it
both.
could be
Okay.
both or either. So you
Yeah.
could sign up either for an email or for a text notification.
I love those text notices. They pop up, they're there and
Yeah, for all of you political junkies, you get
Yeah.
Kathy puts the election notices out there as soon as she gets done with the count. So you can get it right on your telephone.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, next, section 2.13, initiative and referendum. The way the charter works, it simply says that the council has to establish an ordinance for setting out an initiative and referendum. One of the issues that comes up from time to time is that the way the ordinance is written, if the public does something through an initiated action or a referendum action, the council no longer can change that without going back out to vote. That's a forever rule. A lot of places have a time limit on that, 3 years, 5 years, some period of time. And what I've noticed is that there have been occasions where the council wanted to change something and couldn't because it had been adopted by referendum, but just didn't want to ever go through the trouble of putting it back out for another question. So just throwing out there, if there's any interest in changing that, the one issue that has come up from time to time has been parochial school transportation funding. That was, I think the council at one point did away with it and the public overruled the council and put it back. And it's gradually gotten smaller and smaller as the private school enrollments have dropped. But it's still an issue from time. It's been an issue from time to time, and nobody wants to touch it. Nobody wants to put it out for another referendum. Any interest in changing that?
I think that should be addressed by ordinance myself, yeah.
Okay, so we'll leave that alone as far as the charter goes. The next section is city administration. There's not a whole lot in there. The one question that has come up is that section 3.04 talks about, well, the whole talks about removal of the administrator. At the time the charter was written, it was unusual for a city administrator to have an employment agreement. That now has become pretty much standard practice, industry-wide, municipality-wide. Also, pretty much every manager I'm aware of has some form of employment agreement. So the issue becomes, does having an employment agreement with the city administrator, does it line up with the charter, or is there a conflict there between the administrator's employment agreement and the charter and the charter itself? That is addressed in Dennis's employment agreement, which basically, for a little bit of background, was a 3-year agreement. It had a provision for termination at will, in effect, which required an agreement between the parties on a settlement agreement between them. And it just references that if the termination is for cause, there is no requirement on the city to have, for example, a severance package or anything like that for the administrator. But the city would have to go through, to prove it's a for cause issue, the actual removal process in the charter, which is a rather messy process. And it's unlikely that it's something that people will take unless it's really egregious. So let's say, for example, the council's not happy with the manager's performance. They give him an evaluation. They tell him he needs to improve A, B, C, D. He has 6 months to do so. At the end of 6 months, he hasn't done that, in their opinion. Then they go through the removal process to avoid paying a 3-year, 6-month severance package. And they have to go through a public hearing process and drag it all out through the public and make it real messy. Tendencies are most councils would never do that. They just go ahead and say, fine, here's your severance package, go away. We don't want to be real messy about this. So I think that if we wanted to address anything in that area, it might be just simply to clarify that the council can enter into an employment agreement with the manager or the administrator, and just leave it at that. I don't think we need to really do a whole lot. And Dennis, did the attorney get into this at all when you went through your contract?
Yes, very much.
Did he agree that it matched the charter, was okay, or?
Oh, well, I don't know if that question was asked. I think we could certainly get that from him on that, in that sense, certainly.
Yeah, why don't we do that? Because I think, obviously if the council's behaving in a certain way and somebody could raise issues about it, because the charter may not be clear, we ought to try to clarify that. So if you could ask Marty or whoever over there works on that issue, what they think, that would be helpful.
Will do, certainly.
Any other comments on that? And again, one thing we may want to think about, and if you could ask the attorney, I'd appreciate it, Dennis. Is there anything that prohibits a locked-in contract between the city and an administrator? By a locked-in contract, I mean a contract of a fixed term where even if you get rid of the person, you have to pay them out. Some school departments have done that,
Yes.
where you enter into a 3 or a 5-year contract, and 2 years into it, you fire the school superintendent and have to pay them for 3 more years. And I think we ought to make it clear that that's not permissible on the city side, but
We believe there has been some case law that may have changed some of the way that's approached. I do believe what you're saying is, yes, it's worth getting a legal opinion from the attorney on that, because there's been quite a bit of debate around those across the state. I would just say that about those types of provisions and that. So certainly.
yeah, there was a court case a couple of years ago involving Rumford, I think it was.
Yes. Yep.
Where it's always been pretty much assumed that city administrators or managers were at-will employees, kind of. Especially if they had a contract that has specified their terms and conditions. And the court said, no, that may not be the case. It may depend on some other characteristics of what's included in the city's charter. and other factors. So they basically said, when the council up in Rumford let somebody go without cause, they violated the employee's rights, had to do a pretty big payment for them. Okay, section 4.02 specifies that the city council will adopt a personnel ordinance. I don't believe the city council has ever done a person, or certainly and recently, there's no personnel ordinance. There is a personnel rules and regulations set. So I think that should just be eliminated and or specify that the council will adopt appropriate personnel rules and regulations governing city employees.
Yeah, I don't think it's needed.
I
Okay,
agree.
so we can get rid of that as unnecessary. Section 4.04 talks about city attorney. And the way that works is kind of unusual. I did not even realize that when I was the city administrator. I guess I didn't pay that much attention to this provision of the charter. The way the city attorney is selected, he's nominated by the city administrator. And then the council goes ahead and approves, has the right to approve that. There's no specified term. There's no requirement to periodically review. Is there any interest in doing something about that? Either changing the method of appointment and or putting some term on it?
So I guess I would have a question of clarity on this, because when I read this, I don't know, maybe it's the way I'm reading it, but it kind of implies that the city attorney would also be the attorney for every department. Wouldn't that include the school department, and the school department has its own attorney?
Well, there's stuff in the charter that seems to apply to school departments that no longer applies to school departments because of a state Supreme Court ruling involving the city of Lewiston, where the city was trying to exercise certain controls over the school department. I think it was approval of labor contracts.
Oh, okay.
And the school department took the city to court, and the school department won. And basically the city got kicked out of a lot of that stuff.
Huh.
So I think it also comes up under the finance committee, for example.
Mm-hmm.
The way the charter is written, it seems like the finance committee has authority over purchasings in the school department. Well, it doesn't, again, because of this court situation.
Right.
So it's a little unclear because the charter's never been totally fixed to reflect that. But so no, I don't think the city council can enforce an attorney on the school department.
Okay.
But basic
Can I
question.
I have a question of clarity as well. So you said the city administrator typically takes care of hiring the attorney and
Yes.
so forth. But the way I'm reading this is that the city council does that for the most part.
The city administrator nominates the city attorney. So it's kind of like a presidential appointment where the president nominates a cabinet officer, and then the council has to approve the appointment.
Okay, so is that how this reads?
That's how it currently reads, yes. And it's for an
Okay.
unspecified period. And I don't think we ever had a discussion in the time I was there about changing attorneys. Clearly, I think if the council started being unhappy with the representation they were having, that would raise that issue and something would be done. I will also tell you that changing attorneys is difficult in the municipal setting because of the history that somebody has.
Hmm.
And I think Brandon Isaacson has been the city's law firm for 20, 30 years now, Dennis, for quite a long time. And I know the last time that the attorney changed, all of the records from what attorney's office was maintaining had to be shipped over to Brandon Isaacson for them to have, so that they'd have a little bit of the history behind it. And it can certainly be quite disruptive. But the question is, do we want to just leave that as it is or put some additional requirements? Patty says leave it as it is.
Yeah. Ed, the point, if I may.
Yes.
If you look at that first sentence, there shall be a city attorney nominated by the administrator and appointed by the city council. It doesn't say confirmed by the
Right.
city council. And if I recall from way back in the commission I served on, that was deliberate because the city council, the city attorney was going to be working for the city and the city council, and then the city council could decide when and if to terminate the city attorney's services. So it's maybe just a very fine point there, but unlike other nominations from this, it is a little different from other appointments and or nominations of the city administrator.
Yes, it's one of the few that requires council action. The other one is the finance director, as I recall.
City clerk, I believe.
Nope, city clerk, that got changed. It was
That
at
got
one
changed.
point, but that
Oh.
got changed.
Well,
So
that's a
the only one, the only one that requires council confirmation is city attorney and the finance director. So we're okay with that section. These are awfully easy ones to get through. Section 4.05, the planning board. There are a few issues that come up here. One issue that came up again 10 years ago was the notion of, should we continue to have associate members or just have full members on the planning board? Right now, there are 7 full members and 2 associates. 10 years ago, it was decided that the associates were helpful. And I think the planning department's opinion supported that. They felt it was nice to have that flexibility. Some of you Linda, you're on the planning board.
I'm currently on the planning board now, yes. And, so from experience of I've been there for about 1.5 years now on the planning board. And there have been a couple of times where a sitting member was not available for the meeting. So the associate member came in and voted as a sitting member so that we had the full number of votes, sitting members. But I'm not sure that that's something, if that was language that was put in there because at times there weren't enough actual sitting members sitting there to have the quorum needed to make the necessary vote. You know what I'm saying? I don't know that. I mean, I've never seen a time on the planning board that I've been there that there have not been enough people to have a quorum to make a vote, and most of the time it's always been enough sitting members outside of the associates that I didn't think was necessary. But I don't know the actual historic,
Yeah.
you know what I mean, why that was put in that place. And if the planning board has made any comment on that.
I mean, we certainly could ask and see what people think. I think there's probably a couple of reasons. It's not unusual for planning boards to have associate members. First, because it's a way to get potential new members trained before they get fully appointed. Doesn't always work that way, obviously. People get appointed without going through being associates first, but it does give you a training ground for potentially for new members. It also gives you, well, I always feel bad if somebody's got a major project, they come in and they want to have they need to have an approval, and instead of having 7 people, they're down to 5 and they need 4 to approve the project. And I'm not sure if that's the rule here in this planning board. It has to be approved by 4.
It
That's
is
how
4. That's the quorum.
So I think that those 2 reasons tie in there. It gets a little bit complicated because if you have, for example, if you have a public hearing and you have a seated board of 7, and that they put it off for 2 weeks to finish their debate and make a decision, then when you come back 2 weeks later, you theoretically ought to have the same 7 and not have one of the alternates step in. But anyway, it gets a little bit complicated. But when we talked about it 10 years ago, we decided that it worked pretty well and we ought to leave it. But I'd be curious, to once again hear from planning and maybe from the board members themselves, Linda.
Yep.
Patty.
Yes, thank you. I currently serve on the Board of Appeals. It's a different section, but I think it's been wonderful having associate members, because it seems like every single meeting, somebody has something that came up and they're not able to make it. So it's kind of nice to assure that we always have enough people for the quorum, for the vote. And I agree. I think it's nicer to have 7 people and not just 5.
Right.
So
Ye-
it's worked very well for us and we've used them quite a bit.
We have
Yes,
a meeting next week, next Monday. Would you like me to bring that up and just ask everybody
Yeah.
that's there and just see what their opinion on that would be? I could do that.
Yeah, why don't you do that? I think
Okay.
I certainly as agree with Patty and lean toward leaving it as it is, but I'd be always curious to hear what people think.
Sure. And I'd have to agree also. I mean, I like the idea of an associate member having the opportunity to sit there and learn and because sometimes when you're going into this new, I know I went in new without being an associate member and there was a learning curve there. And as much as I've done on different boards and committees, there was a learning curve and it's,
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah, the first thing all planning board members need to hear is it's not their job to make up the rules, it's their job to apply the rules.
Right.
That's
Exactly.
always a shock.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, actually, all of these issues with the planning board also apply to the Board of Appeals. So,
Right.
Steve,
When I was, the reason I got on the planning board years ago, probably 15 years ago, was because my son was a student member of the planning board from Lewiston High School. And I started looking at his packets that would be pre-mailed out to all the people, including him. And I said, boy, there's good stuff in here and a lot of important information getting passed out. Is there still a student member on the planning board?
No, there's not.
no.
There hasn't been in quite a while, I don't believe.
Mhm.
And I think it's a great experience for somebody to learn that. I would like to see that brought back. My son enjoyed it. We had great discussions riding home and talking during the week before and after the planning board meetings, so I could totally influence his opinion.
I'm assuming he wasn't a full member, he was just a participant.
He was a participant. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think it's a great
Yeah.
way to start. That way, if he's doing it and he's 16, 17, 18, and he gets sent to Vietnam when he's 18, he'll know what he's doing, which I hope we don't ever have to do again.
Okay, another issue. Both the planning board and the Board of Appeals have 5-year terms. I've often felt that that's rather long
It is.
It is.
and that 4 might be better. And the limitation, I think, only on the planning board is that you can serve no more than 9 years in a 10-year period. It's a very strange way
Yeah.
it's written.
Yeah, it is.
So that if you get appointed to fill one year of a unexpired term, you then get reappointed, you've got 6 years, you have to go off, where somebody else could do 9 years or 10 years. It gets, plus the notion is that the term should be staggered. I can't imagine that they're even staggered anymore, because you've had, if you fill in for 1 year and you do a full 5-year term, you're off on year 6
Yeah.
instead of year 5 or year 10.
Right.
So, I mean, I would like to see it change to 4 years and a two-term maximum, or 3-term maximum, or something like that. Thoughts?
I'm sure the people on the planning board would feel the same way.
Yeah.
It's long. I mean, 5 years, I'm fully committed, but 5 years is a long time. It is.
Mhm.
And, if you're interested in other things, it's a difficult process too, right? Because if we'll say I wanted to, and I love being on the planning board, I love what I'm learning, I love what I'm doing, but if I decided that I wanted to run for city council this fall, which by the way, I'm not, I would have to terminate my seat on the planning board, right? And then they'd have to find, and I think that, I don't know. I think
Yeah.
that conversation needs to be had about maybe lowering the number of years. Yeah.
Again, Linda, it might be, if you're having a meeting next week, you might raise that and see what people think.
Sure.
But I think it just might be easier. I think 4 years doesn't sound as dramatic as 5. And I know we frequently are filling unexpired terms as people resign because of
Yeah.
X, Y, or Z.
Yeah. Even 4 years is fairly long. I think the finance committee, they're only 3-year terms.
Yeah, finance committee is
Yeah.
3.
Mhm.
And they're limited to 2 3-year terms,
Right,
2 full 3-year terms.
consecutive,
get-
right, yeah.
Why don't you get some feedback for us on that, Linda?
I
And
will.
Patty, I don't know if you're having a Board of Appeals meeting anytime soon, but
We
same
rarely
would go
do.
there.
But I think a 3-year term with a maximum of 3 terms sounds doable. Then there's your 9 years that
Right.
we've got now, if somebody wishes to continue serving.
Okay, that does sound like a good plan. The last issue with those 2 boards is something we talked about last time. Currently, they're appointed by the mayor. We obviously had some discussion last time and had differences of opinions on the mayor's appointment authority. One of the alternatives that came up was the notion that for what I'll call these charter created boards, that it remain appointment by mayor but require confirmation of the council. So I'll throw that out there as an alternative to, one of the ideas is obviously if to have the council do it. I think that's very difficult.
No.
So any thoughts on appointments?
Was there a specific history as to why that has it always been this way that the mayor just appoints and there's no, because it's not like that for every position, right? Some positions do need council approval even with an appointment, right? Or is there none that are like that?
Very few. The only one I think
Few?
is there's the school committee
Yeah,
representative. And Patty, what's the other one?
Well, was finance chair or finance something you mentioned that
Nope.
needs
The
approval of the
finance
city council?
No, the
Right.
finance is split. The appointment with finance is split
okay.
between the mayor appoints the non-council members and the council president appoints the council representatives. Roger, you want to give us the history on why it is the way it is?
Under the pre-1979 city charter, which was the 1939 city charter, the mayor had a very extensive appointment authority because we had various boards and commissions for police, fire, public works, human services. It was called welfare then, I think. And they did none of them required any kind of council confirmation. So the mayor had a greatly reduced power of appointment under the current charter. I don't recall even having any discussions about having a council confirmation, so I don't think it even came up. Of course, back then, and I think in the early years under the current charter, we had very few of these, not too many of these ad hoc committees as we've seen recently, which from what I gather has been where there's been some political friction. It's more with the ad hoc committees than with these charter created committees. Is that an accurate assumption?
Yeah, although I think there has been some fitzing about the particularly not so much the Board of Appeals. I'm not sure the council really pays much attention. Patty, I'm sorry about that. I'm not sure the
That's
council
okay.
pays all that much attention to the appointees to the Board of Appeals. But I think there's a lot of interest in the planning board these days on the part of the council.
Yeah.
And sometimes there's perhaps there can be, I don't know if there really has been, but there can be a significant difference in point of views about planning among elected officials, from very pro-limit, do whatever you want, to very restrictive. So it can be a little bit, there has been a little bit, it hasn't been terrible, but there's been a little bit. My preference, and I'll be honest, is to try to have something like the planning board, which has really important authority in the city, be a moderate, well-representative body that has people on it who come from various backgrounds and have various points of view. So I don't know, what do people think?
I think that should be the way it is for all committees myself. I think we should have a good representation all the way around. I mean, and I think that would depend on, right, like who the mayor is and who they're deciding to put on or nominate for a board or put on a board. I personally would like to see a well-rounded board in every aspect.
That's
Patty?
utopia. I don't know if it's possible.
I know.
Well,
I'm
if I
dreaming.
may, if I may, one of the comments I made at another meeting that we had is that elections have consequences. So when we elect a mayor of the city, I think the mayor should run the city the way that they see fit. I mean, they change all the time. So that's the opportunity to, and the fact that the planning board, maybe that's the reason it is 5 years. So you're not having a mayor change it up every other year.
That's true.
That might keep it more moderate.
Yeah, I think
That might be
originally,
a reason.
originally that was also tied back to the mayor at that time had a 2-term limit. So the mayor was not possible for the mayor to be in office for the entire period
Right.
to do a complete, what I'll call clean sweep.
Right.
That got changed now. Now we allow 3 2-year terms. So you can potentially have a situation, we have not yet, I don't believe. I don't think Bob may have made a full sweeping set of appointments. But you now have a situation where the mayor could make all of the appointments on, say, the planning board. I get the impression there's still a bit of a difference of opinion here. Anybody else want to weigh in? Jennifer, Steve?
Well, I just don't see this as a freestanding issue. I am not at all interested in seeing the mayor's powers be diminished. They're rather limited as they are. I understand the arguments for some kind of confirmation power given to the council. So where I am, and I think maybe a couple others are too, that if we give the mayor the vote, then sure, I'm all for giving the council confirmation authority on appointments.
Yeah, we're not all there with that one, Roger. I know
Understood.
Patty's got some concerns, and Jennifer, did you have some concerns about that? You did. You were okay with the mayor voting, right?
Yes.
The part of the difficulty with the mayor voting is it complicates the entire system because that adds another council position and things like that. So it does get
I understand.
interrelatedly complicated.
Mm.
Expensive,
Yeah,
potentially.
moderately, and not terribly. I mean, we could probably afford $3,500 for another council member, but yes, there are those kinds of issues. So let's set that aside for the big structural discussion. One of the other issues that has come up about the planning board in particular, and has come up with regard to some other appointments, is how do we remove somebody from the planning board who has just gone wacko, but not necessarily made any of those forfeiture issues? That came up. We had somebody on the planning board who was appointed and started serving and served for a while without anybody realizing that he had in the past been convicted of violating our zoning ordinance. And then everybody started going, well, how do we ask that person to step down or leave or stuff like that? There's no mechanism specified in the charter for removal for other than the specific issues that are listed there. Talking to the city attorney's position was that the appointing authority would have the ability to remove the person for a cause after a hearing. That's the whole thing got very messy. So there was some discussion about trying to have some mechanism in the charter for removing appointees or clarifying how an appointee could be removed for something less dramatic than violation of a felony or some other major violation of law, or less clear cut than, moving out of the city, for example.
I think the mayor brings him in, the mayor can take him out.
Take him out. Wow.
We tried to- When Roger was on the planning board with me, we tried to remove him, but you're right, there were no mechanisms.
No, no, and I lawyered up big time, so that wasn't happening.
You know, and there have been occasions within the planning board itself where we had people who were concerned about the behavior of a planning board member who actually felt threatened in one instance. I don't think they were, it was just a matter of the person's personality. But they were concerned that a member was out of control. We'll just leave it at that. So I'll be glad to poke around, see if I can find some potential language that might clarify the ability of the appointing authority to remove someone, but
Okay.
okay. That okay with everybody?
Yep.
Mhm.
Okay. Section 5.01, the school committee, again, that's
Yeah,
So-
excuse me, Ed,
the same issue. Yes.
did I miss or did we skip over a point about should we have language limiting folks from serving on more than one charter created?
Oh, you're right. We did. I skipped that. I think it would make sense,
I agree.
particularly for the planning board and the Board of Appeals, because decisions of the planning board can potentially be appealed to the Board of Appeals.
Great.
So I think putting some language in there that says you can't serve on more than one charter created
I think,
board or commission.
Yeah.
Okay. On the school committee, we have the same issue there with staggered terms. That's going to be tied in, I think, with the council. If we go to staggered terms for the council, we should probably go for staggered terms for the school committee as well. If we don't, then we could just leave it the way it is. Right?
I agree.
Yes.
Compensation, again, that's the issue came up there. There was some questions from the school committee on whether they should be compensated or get more compensation and or get compensated for being on the negotiating committee. Because I take it the negotiating committee takes a lot of time.
mm.
Yes. Francis, yes.
So again, we might look at that when we go back and look at the issue of overall compensation. For the benefit of those who weren't here last time, was basically where we came down on that was we want to make a recommendation to the council so they could make an adjustment by ordinance rather than putting specific numbers in the charter. So
Yeah, I
same
might
problem. same
make a suggestion, and I know it's not up to us, it's just a suggestion. Because I know some of these haven't been revised in, decades. So maybe put in something that relates to either a percentage or base, I don't know, to like something similar to like base minimum wage. I don't know, but I'm just making
Right.
Something that you don't have to revisit the charter every single time to make an adjustment on something, so that it has something that automatically has it figured out.
Yeah, I think the last time I'm aware of a change was right at the end of Larry Gilbert's term. I think there was an increase. Steve, you had your fingers involved in that. I
We
think
only increased the mayors.
just the mayors, right? That was the only one. And we have asked Kathy's going to do some poking around, see what people are being paid, Dennis. So we'll get something back and have something to work from. We have the same issue of forfeiture from office in here, and for the benefit of those who weren't here, we talked about going back to the moral turpitude language, but also including some enforcement mechanism where it's clear that the council and or the school committee is the sole judge of its own members. So when you have an issue of does council member X really live at address Y, and some people say no and some people say yes, there's a mechanism for resolving that issue. That has come up a couple of times historically about where people live, if they really live where they're supposed to live, if they've moved, etc. And there's no good way to deal with it right now. In section 5.03 of the charter, it says that the school committee has to operate within the financial limitations established by the council. And I think that just needs to be changed to say within the financial limitations imposed by the approved budget. Because technically the council, yes, has a role in approving the budget, but their action is not final. It's then subject to the vote of the public,
Right.
at least at the moment. And that could change too, but it just doesn't make sense to have that in there saying it's up to what the council decided when it's not just the council's decision. So, okay with that one?
Yeah.
The other question that comes up, and this also gets into the city side of the budget, is the whole budget structure and the scheme that we use and the deadlines that are used. I know there's some feeling on the council that the school budget ought to be voted on in the June primary and primary years. We did that last year, I think. And the way it works now, that's not necessarily the case. Generally, as this year, the school budget is scheduled for May 11th, in part because the charter says that the city budget has to be done by the end of May. So one possibility, and then we have problems elsewhere in the whole budget thing because of the states coming in and basically pulling the school budget away from local control. In terms of our charter provisions. So I think one of the things we need to do is to probably look at how we can make a clear distinction in the charter between the school budget and the municipal budget. Because the school budget, just as a simple example, if the total city budget is over the GNP IPD, one of our favorite terms, the gross domestic GDP, gross domestic product, implicit price deflator, then it takes 5 city council members to approve the budget. Except no, it doesn't, because the state says only 4 need to approve the school budget. So you can get this really weird situation going on where you can have the school budget approved by 4 votes and the school budget fail with 4 positive votes. And it gets even worse than that, because if you have to live with the GNP IPD, all of the reduction then has to come off the city side of the budget. So it's just a whole mess. And what I will offer to do is take a shot at rewriting all of that stuff and giving folks something to take a look at on how this might work. But I think clarifying that there's a difference between the school budget and the city budget, and perhaps taking a look at changing the deadline. I'm not necessarily against the end of May for the city budget, and maybe requiring the council to do its vote on the school budget by the end of May, but then not worry about the final approval of the budget. Obviously, you're going to have the referendum. And a few years ago, we voted down the first one, so we didn't even have that until late in the year. So probably the easiest thing for me to do there is try to put something together for everybody to take a look at. Is that acceptable?
Yes.
Yes. Also, I agree. I mean, going along with the primary is perfect. You get better voter turnout.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, when I was up in Bangor, the school department was very much against putting the school budget on the June ballot because they didn't want people to come out and vote.
Oh, see, that's
Yeah.
not okay. I don't think.
Yeah,
I think
they-
I'm
Names.
totally in agreement with having that in a primary, because when you look at, 36,000 people registered to vote or whatever it is, and you got 877 that come out on the school budget,
Yeah.
to me, that's not okay.
yeah, I agree.
Yeah, interestingly enough, the city of Tucson, or the city of Bangor actually voted not to keep taking the budget to referendum. I
Really?
think it's one of the few school departments in the state that exercise that option of opting out of the referendum. But I think that's only good for a 6-year period. So at the end of that 6-year period, they have to put it back on the ballot to see if people want to vote on the school budget again.
Hmm.
So anyway, I'll take a shot at that and see what we can come up with. There was some suggestion that we should specify the fiscal year in the charter. I don't think we should do that. I think that's a mistake. Because it changed already once. Used to
I
be
agree.
everybody was on a calendar year, and then we went to this July fiscal year. So let's leave it vague. Leave it up to the council to set.
Good point.
Let's see.
Excuse me, Ed, or anybody, I'm sorry for my ignorance
The
here.
current,
I'm going back. When is the primary?
go ahead.
I'm getting the idea that primary's in the spring,
Usually in June.
June.
June. Okay, just wanted to be
In
clear.
June.
Yeah, I just want to clarify. That's what I assumed. I just couldn't remember.
It's in June, but it's every other June.
Okay.
Yeah, so my internet connection is once again unstable. It's every other June.
So we would adjust it so it's
The proceed. Yeah, I think, let me give it a shot, see what I can come up with that people
Okay.
can take a look at.
Thank you. Sorry to.
The other,
interrupt.
sure, no problem, anytime. The other issue is, if the council fails to adopt a budget by its deadline, a strange procedure that I've never seen any other charter in the universe have about how that's resolved. And the way it's resolved is that the city administrator meets with the school committee and puts together a final proposed budget. You have a 72-hour period in which you meet with the school committee, put together a final proposed budget, and send it in for the council to vote on. And if they don't adopt it, it then goes into effect.
Really?
And again, it doesn't make any sense any longer because of how the school budget is structured.
Right.
And it really is kind of, I think it'd be much simpler just if we break the school budget out, talk about the municipal budget, and the manager makes a final proposal on the municipal budget. That's effectively how tomorrow the city council will vote. It'll be actually a final budget that's put together based on the input of the council plus staff's work, and is presented to the council. If the council votes it down and you have a deadline, gives the manager one more chance to deal with it, try to come up with a final, present it to the council. Yes, no, let's get on with life, or let's just get this adopted. So I can address that in the revised version of the budget part 2. GNP IPD. Do you all know what the GNP IPD is? Took me a while to try to figure this out. It is basically a measure of the real growth in national product. Not the GNP, which picks up inflation. It is the real growth. So it tends to run generally behind what the GNP does, and also tends to, at least recently, it's been in the same range or slightly below the rate of inflation. So if you look back over the last few years, it's generally been in the 1.2 to 2.2% range. And I think in only 1 year in the last 5 or so has it been over 2%. So when the city's expenditure budget exceeds the GNP IPD, instead of needing 4 votes for the budget, you need 5 votes for the budget. I'm thinking in 10 years, maybe once, we adopted a budget without having to exceed the GNP IPD. So effectively, more often than not, you're required 5 votes for the budget. The question is whether we should keep some kind of a standard like that, whether this standard makes any sense or some other standard ought to be applied. Should it apply to the overall expenditures of the city, or should it apply to the tax levy? I've always had some problems with it applying to the expenditures, not just taxes, because everybody's concerned about taxes. And there are situations where you can get a big influx of money. For example, after revenue sharing was cut from 5% to 2.22%, if that was restored in 1 year, and we wanted to bring back the people we laid off, you would automatically be exceeding the limit, even though in that same year, you might not be raising taxes. So I'm just going to throw that out there and see if anybody has any thoughts on it. I don't know. I know historically that was first introduced by referendum. And it's actually in the city's ordinances as well as a referendum item. And in the referendum item, there is no out. You must live with the GNP-IPD. There's no way to override it with 5 votes. In the charter, which governs, it can be overridden by 5 votes. So it's kind of a messy thing. In some ways, it might just be simpler saying you need a supermajority vote 5 to adopt the budget, live with it that way. But anyway, I'd be curious what people think. It's an inconvenience and a strange mechanism. It's the only place I've ever even heard of GNP-IPD being talked about.
Where is that in the charter?
It's in 6.07.
Okay.
I like the idea of the 5 people vote, 5 counselor vote for the budget. Keep it simple. More than 4 because it's big stuff.
I would agree on that. Yeah. But that just sounds messy, what you just described to me. And there, it doesn't sound like a lot of common sense in there. I don't know. It just sounds real messy to me.
Yeah, I think the notion was to try to say that the city's expenditure should not grow any faster than the uninflated growth in the nationwide domestic product. I mean, there's a number of philosophical issues with that. The nationwide growth of domestic product may not be at all in the same range as the local growth.
Right.
As one simple example. And again, it's a measure that nobody has ever heard of. So it doesn't have any grounding in our normal experience. We also have to understand there's also a state limit that we have to live on, the LD1 limit. That's not so much of a problem. That's based on 2 factors. You're allowed to increase your budget by the actual growth in your assessments, your assessed value. So if your assessed value goes up 1%, you're allowed a 1% growth. And the actual real income growth, uninflated real income growth in the state. So if you have a 1% growth in assessed value and a 3% statewide growth in real income, you can increase your overall budget by 4%. Cities never had any troubles meeting that requirement because it's compounding. Any year that you come in under, you get to put in a bank and you can use it. A year you come in over, and the city's way like 30% under the limit or something like that now because it's tended to be below that. The other complicating factor is because that is also in an ordinance and was adopted by referendum, we would need to check with the attorney's office to see whether if we eliminated it from the charter, that would reinstate what's in the code, which has no override provision with it, which could be devastating. I mean, at some years this year, for example, if we were applying this to the citywide budget, we'd be having to look at cutting $7-8 million, Dennis, between the schools and the city.
Around there.
So it could be quite devastating.
Yeah.
So let me, I will volunteer to do some poking around and see if I can come up with any alternatives here that we might want to take a look at. As mentioned, one of the simplest things would just simply say it takes 5 votes to adopt the budget.
Right.
That's effectively the current process.
And
I'd
that
have
wouldn't
to-
affect the ordinance that may have been that was put in place by a referendum or any of that, right? That would just,
Probably not. That's what I'd
Okay.
want to check, because the
Okay.
charter, if the charter has a clear provision on how the budget is adopted, an ordinance can't overrule that.
okay,
Um, But I'd really want to get a legal opinion on that,
okay.
because, we're going to talk about, yeah, I just need to get a legal opinion so we don't end up hurting ourselves and making life very difficult. Okay. So I'll work on all the budget stuff. Bond issue. The current, there's a current limitation in the charter that any project that requires a bond issue of more than 15% of the prior year's tax levy has to go to referendum. Right at the moment, that is about $8.6 million. So anytime the city wants to do, if the city wanted to do a project this year, just use an example, what is it, Dennis, $25 million police station?
$34 million.
$34 million police station,
Yeah.
that would have to go to a vote of the public. If we wanted to do let's just say a fire station came in at was going to come in at $9 million, that would have to go to the public. Some question is raised as to whether that should be raised, the percentage should be raised or eliminated. I'd be curious what people think.
Because we're already doing that with schools, correct? Like when we have this, or is that a different process?
When you do a project with state money, such as new school, that has to have a referendum. But like when we did the middle school renovation,
Yep.
or the high school expansion that's ongoing now, both those are 100% local, but because they exceeded the 15% limit, both of those had to go to referendum.
Okay.
I think it's a good idea.
And I was just going to say, I'm very
Checks and
comfortable.
balances.
That's right. I'm very comfortable with that going to a referendum, that we have the opportunity to look at that as a public and
Mhm.
making that vote, because it also gives people the opportunity, by making that vote, understanding when the next budget season comes around and you have something that you voted on in that referendum, right? That's part of the process for the next following budget, and makes people, I think, gives them a better understanding as to why there may be a need of an increase, because we've already agreed as a city. So,
Right. I don't disagree at all. I think that at a certain level, the public ought to weigh in.
Mhm.
The one fly in the ointment, this is just, you might find this interesting. The city has an agreement with Tom Platts on redevelopment of the Bates Mill complex that requires us to do certain amount, provide parking. We are contractually committed to doing that. The next parking garage we have to build will probably almost surely exceed the bond issue limit.
mhm.
So we'll have to go to the public. If the public votes down the bond issue, we are then in violation of the contractual agreement, and there are very severe financial penalties
Mhm.
associated with that agreement. And there was no provision in that agreement clarifying an out for the city if the public didn't approve it.
Yeah.
And the financial penalties there could be easily in the range of what Dennis, I put together something for the council a few years, like $20 million.
It's a lot.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
And
So
did the city know that going into the agreement?
I don't think so. I think the assumption at that time, because at that time it was a lot cheaper to build a parking garage, was that the city would be able to meet those obligations without necessarily going to the public, but I wasn't here, so I don't know. I inherited, Steve Morgan is the expert on this, because It was very early in my tenure that we had to vote on a parking garage, and he was the swing vote.
Yep. I still think that that's why you hire a city attorney to review the contract. They should have come up with something that protected us in that situation. I'm in agreement with the 15%.
Okay.
Referendum. I'm no
Oh.
expert.
Okay, let's see. Finance Committee, again, I think just clarifying that they don't have authority over the school committee wouldn't be a bad idea since they don't.
Should do that, yep.
And the basic rule here is no more than 6 consecutive years. I was just wondering if we might want to consider changing that to no more than 2 full 3-year consecutive terms. Because if somebody gets appointed, to fill out year 3 of somebody else's appointment, they could only serve a maximum of 4 years
Right.
Yeah,
without necessarily creating another vacancy.
right.
And again, I don't know how well the city clerk is able to track all this stuff. So I think trying to keep it simple might be helpful.
Absolutely. Can you repeat that again? What we're looking here?
Right now, they can't serve more than 6 consecutive years.
Okay.
So if you're appointed to fill out a term and then you're appointed to a new term, if you're appointed to a second term, it's automatically going to create a vacancy when you have to step down.
Right.
And like I say, I think my guess is that that's probably something that's difficult to track
Mhm.
and can fall through the cracks. So just clarifying it, no more than 2 full 3-year terms.
Okay.
Section 6.15 talks about a pension board. Heather says we don't need the pension board anymore. Did our last pensioner pass on, Dennis?
That's correct.
Down to just one, I believe, yeah.
Well, if we're down to just one, I don't think we should change it till that one's gone too.
I think that person, is that person still around or has that person,
I'd have to confirm. I'd have to.
Yeah.
did you?
I thought it was a spouse, a surviving spouse of a.
It was a
retired
surviving
city.
spouse, yes.
Yes, yep.
Now, wait a minute. I'm still around.
You're not getting a city pension under the old city pension plan.
Right, you better not be, Morgan, yeah.
This is the pension plan that predates the city being a main purse,
Right,
the main state system. And I know just a few years, I mean, I think when I came, there were maybe 3 people still on it. And last I heard there was 1. I'm not sure if that person still is or not.
We should probably confirm that first. I've seen a situation at the sheriff's department where they changed out all the health insurance situations and the pensions, and then they were going to cut the spouses off after. And I don't think we should toy with it until we know for sure there's nobody left on it.
Yeah, I mean, the other option is effectively what's been going on is that Heather goes in periodically and just gets the finance committee to approve a cost of living adjustment that tracks what's given for city employees. So that's pretty much been the practice for a long time. So we'll find out and let everybody know. I think, is there anything I missed that people had on their list?
don't think so.
So for the next meeting, I'll try to again do a summary of what we talked about today and clarify where we are to date on what we seem to be in agreement on.
Mhm.
I'll work on some budget language. And then at the next meeting, we may want to go back and revisit the big stuff.
Yep.
About structure. And see where we are there. And I know I have a feeling we won't be 100% in agreement on anything at that point. But I'll try to lay out the alternatives that I see that are available. Give us a place to start. When do we want to meet? When is the next planning board meeting, Linda? It's next Monday?
Next Monday, I've got one Monday, the 10th and Monday, the 24th.
So would we like to meet on the 17th? That's Monday, the 17th,
That works for me.
5 o'clock.
It works for me.
And that, Francis, you're good on Mondays, right?
Tax
Yeah,
day.
that's correct. I'm just double checking now.
Oh, that's
No,
right.
no.
It is tax day.
Yeah, it
Well,
is.
some of us sent our taxes in a month ago.
Some of us did ours too. Yes, all done.
Some of us file an extension.
I
Yeah,
think
it
I
looks good
have,
for me.
I think I have finance committee on that day.
You have
Thanks for making
finance
the
committee?
adjustment.
Well, wait a minute now, wait a
17th?
minute. No, take that back. Do not. I think it's
Okay.
next Monday, the 10th. Should be
Dennis is
good.
checking. Yep,
Yeah.
Dennis is,
You're all set.
What
Yeah,
time does finance committee usually start?
5 o'clock,
5:30.
5:30.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right,
Okay, so we'll see everybody Monday, the 17th at 5 PM. And I'll try to get out a summary. I'll try to also get something out on the budget language. And we'll go from there.
All right.
Good.
Good.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank
Okay.
you all.
Thank you.
Have a good
Good
couple.
night.
Thank you.
Bye.
Yes.
All right, bye-bye.
Have
Boy,
good
that's
night.
a good efficient meeting. I like
night.
that. Woo!
Yeah, well, 8 minutes early. I was gonna finish by 6:30 if we were still going, so.
All right.
Perfect.
Thank you.
I know.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Great job,
Bye-bye.
everyone. Thank you.